Well, hi everyone. China-related infrastructure project videos do really well on this channel. I mostly cover infrastructure projects throughout the United States. That's the vast majority of my videos, but also Europe, other countries, and occasionally China. And my most recent video was on using INSAR satellite data to look at the condition of Three Gorges Dam. And it got me thinking, I've heard about this Belt and Roads Initiative project that China's undertaken for the last 10 plus years. And I thought it'd be a good opportunity to do my own research, find out what that series of projects has been all about, and summarize it here for you today. So we can see this image. The projects consist of a variety of ports, oil and gas pipelines, highways, rail lines. It's massive, and reportedly China has spent over $1 trillion on these projects. So overall, this whole program is the brainchild of Xi Jinping, and his plan calls for a Silk Road economic belt and a 21st century maritime Silk Road. And collectively, that's been referred to as the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. So general goals are Beijing wants to connect participating countries' infrastructure, but also encourage them to open their markets to China and facilitate trade, to link their financial markets to China, to strengthen societal people-to-people relations, and even align their overall economic development policy with China's. Now, I know many of you have heard of the Silk Road. It refers to an ancient network of Eurasian trade routes active from around 100 BC to 1450 AD. The network spanned over 4,000 miles, and it played a central role in facilitating economic, cultural, political, and religious interactions between the East and Western worlds. I recently read a book called The Silk Roads. Extremely interesting book, so I would highly recommend it. If you want to check it out, I have a link in the description. It's a pretty hefty book, so it'll take a while, but I was really engaged with it, and I learned a lot of history and gives good historical context as to what China is trying to replicate here with this Belt and Roads Initiative. On that note, I want to mention that I recently opened Buy Me a Coffee. It's an excellent way to support the channel, and a number of you have done so already, so I really appreciate it. Now let's just look at the types of projects we're talking about here. So we have this Matupo-Katembe Bridge construction. I'm going to go over this in a little bit more detail. Then we have this China-Laos Railway. And then we've got this tunnel project in Pakistan, a massive hydroelectric power plant under construction in Pakistan by the Three Gorges Dam Corporation. So I started doing research on the internet about what this Belt and Roads Initiative is all about. Has it been a success? What problems have they had? What are the criticisms been? What are the complementary aspects have been? And just kind of summarize everything for you here today. And again, the links to all these sources are in the description to this video if you want to check it out for yourself. I'm not going to read this whole thing. I'm just going to hit the highlights. So there's over 200 Belt and Road Initiative projects as of June 2023, and it's pretty much ground to a halt, and I'll get into the reasons why here in a second. As I mentioned, they've spent over $1 trillion cumulatively on these various projects. Projects have included those in Africa, Central America, and even Southeast Asia. Says the Belt and Roads Initiative has transformed from early stage infrastructure construction to energy control and has become an important strategic military outpost. A lot of Western countries are really concerned about the dual use aspects of all this infrastructure relative to supporting China's military ambitions. But some of the setbacks are it's created huge debt for these countries that have accepted these projects because it's been financed by the government of China and their banking system. For example, Sri Lanka declared bankruptcy in 2022, and in large part it was because of this huge port project, Hambantota Port. And again, I've got more details on that here shortly. So Sri Lanka couldn't repay the debt, and essentially China repoed it in exchange for a 99-year lease to China. I don't even think the United States had the Panama Canal for 99 years, thanks to Jimmy Carter. Okay, this Forbes article says that the Belt and Roads Initiative network of enhanced overland and maritime trade routes began in 2013 with much fanfare and hope. And as we know, as time went on, and as I'll show you here, it's been decidedly a mixed bag. And I would say overall it's been a negative from many aspects for both China and the countries that have had these projects constructed with massive debt levels. But they go on to say that Chinese investment has nearly become a euphemism for wasteful spending, environmental destruction, and untenable debt. Many major projects are currently strewn around the world in half-finished disrepair, and the opportunities that were sold to local populations rarely materialized. All up and down the Belt and Road, projects have been marred by delays, financial implosions, and occasionally violent outpourings of negative public sentiment. So as I mentioned, they seized this port in Sri Lanka for a 70% stake and the 99-year lease in exchange for $1.1 billion of their debt. But instead of using that money to free up its foreign reserves, they used it in other payments to save itself from total economic collapse. And this article concludes by saying that these Belt and Road Initiative projects have a high degree of corruption, according to this International Corruption Index, the Trace Bribery Risk Matrix. And just go over a few more articles here. So China's tried to realign expectations and rein in their lending for these projects, and funding's pretty much collapsed for these projects in the last couple of years. So this article indicates that Chinese leadership has toned down the BRI hype and pledged to reform the BRI into an open, green, and clean initiative. Many people remain skeptical about that. They note here, as globalization retreats and protectionism advances, the whole concept of BRI connectivity is changing. Now it's not just about efficiency, but also about security. With recent lockdowns and disruption in supply chains, many of these countries have realized that China can be a very unreliable trading partner. So let's get into the overall summary of these projects, and then I'll get into specific examples. So there's other programs that China has in addition to the Belt and Road Initiative to promote infrastructure in foreign countries. Let's start looking at specific examples. We've got this rail line project in Laos, hundreds of miles long, extends into China. You can see these projects are massive. This is associated with that rail project. You've got essentially an industrial city with offices, residential complexes, shops, and so on. So this project's referred to as the Botan-Vientiane Railway. The estimated cost for this project was $6 billion, and it was 60% funded with debt financing from the Export-Import Bank of China. The remaining 40%, $2.4 billion, was a joint venture company between the two countries, in which China holds a 70% stake. So this is all China for the most part. Western publications have indicated that Laos could end up in default on its debts, as this one project alone accounts for 45% of Laos's GDP. So really it's a tough choice for these countries. They want to develop just like everybody else does. They take on these massive debts that ends up crushing their economy and leads to political unrest in many cases. But essentially there's a vacuum there. Western countries really aren't investing a lot in places like Laos. I think the United States has spent maybe $300 million in the last 30 years in that country. And the bulk of that funding has been for removal of unexploded ordnance. You know, the U.S. during the Vietnam War, I think, dropped more tonnage of bombs on Laos than just about any other country. But let's get an idea of U.S. funding. Last year, this is from 2022, Ukraine accounted for $12 billion. Let's see where Laos was. Number 70 at $122 million. So when somebody like China comes in offering projects of billions of dollars, and there's plenty of money to go around for the politicians to put in their pocket, they oftentimes take it. And then the population suffers the results over the ensuing years in many cases. And as I mentioned earlier, there's been a lot of protests. This is in the Philippines. The banner says, "Resist the China debt trap." And some people have referred to this as debt trap diplomacy, because China typically charges an interest rate of around 5% for these projects. And they don't ask a lot of questions. There's not a lot of expectation for adherence to environmental standards that are generally recognized internationally. So there's been a lot of environmental degradation associated with these projects. The IMF usually finances projects at a rate of 2%, but they're much more stringent in their loan requirements in terms of project execution, adhering to various human rights and environmental standards. So as I mentioned, there's been a variety of infrastructure projects that have been built and financed by the government of China. And as an example, here's this Cococoto Sinclair Dam in Ecuador. It's 60 miles east of Quito, and it's the largest energy project in Ecuador. Construction cost was estimated to be $2.25 billion and has an operating capacity of 1,500 megawatts. They talk about, over the years, China's provided $19 billion in the form of loans to Ecuador for the construction of bridges, highways, irrigation systems, schools, health clinics, and about a half dozen dams, including this Cococoto Sinclair Dam. Ecuador repays its debt to China by providing China with oil at a supposed discount. By 2018, China imported 80% of oil produced in Ecuador. Post-construction note here, in December 2018, so a couple years after the plant became fully operational, small cracks were identified in the generator hall and its surrounding equipment. The cracks were first discovered in 2014, but the full extent of them is unknown, as a thorough assessment would include deconstructing portions of the power plant, which is cost prohibitive. So a lot of quality concerns with many of these projects. But again, there's a diverse range of these projects. Here's a bridge that was built in Croatia, nearly 8,000 feet long. Construction was started in 2018 and completed in 2021. The bridge allows passage of buses, heavy trucks, and trucks carrying hazardous loads. So the bridge design is a multi-span cable-stayed bridge. But again, this project's not without controversy. Environmentalists have expressed concerns about damage to sea life in the Bay of Maulistan, and a lot of people think the cost-benefit analysis doesn't pan out for this bridge. So let's look at overall financing for the Belts and Roads Initiative. You can see it started early in 2008. It wasn't really officially called Belts and Roads until 2013, from what I understand. Peak financing was in 2016, and it's been downhill from there. By far, the vast majority of loans that have required renegotiation since 2001 is in sub-Saharan Africa. And the projects that had the least amount of renegotiation were those in the Middle East and North Africa. It just shows you the amounts of these loans that were renegotiated. A lot of financing activity here to try and stabilize these loans, particularly in recent years. And you can see that Chinese loans to Africa has pretty much dropped back to zero. This shows you the distribution of these loans over time. So I mentioned the Matupo-Katembe Bridge in Mozambique. Construction was carried out by Chinese China Road and Bridge Corporation, and a large part of the project was financed by loans from the Chinese Exim Bank. Really, the key aspect of this bridge is to free up truck traffic to the Democratic Republic of Congo, because the DRC produces, I think, the largest amount of cobalt minerals in the world, and as well as many other minerals that are crucial to the production of EV batteries. And we got this project in Angola, this rail project that China started and really didn't fully complete. It was plagued with reliability problems, equipment failures. It was pretty much a disaster. So the United States offered a loan of $250 million for a bunch of European contractors to come in and get this rail line in shape, and provide about 1,500 new rail cars, and really get it operational. And the U.S. didn't demand that all the material transport on the train goes to the United States, but the hope is that some of it would be offered to the United States in exchange for getting this rail line up and running. But again, it just shows you that there may be an opportunity for Western countries to come in and either outright buy some of these projects, or certainly help these countries get back on their feet if they consider themselves to be essentially victimized by excessive loan amounts or rates or other conditions of these projects. Now, again, these projects have really gotten the attention of the U.S. government, and there's an active effort to step in and get more of a foothold in these places relative to China, because China was in there early, but essentially made a mess out of many of these projects. Here's a note from this testimony. Since 2015, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor has invested approximately $7.2 billion in nearly 5,000 megawatts of coal-fired power for the national grid, and a majority of this coal power relies on imports, deepening Pakistan's financial difficulties. So that's been a lot of criticism of these projects lately. You know, China's committed to zero emissions, net emissions by 2060, I believe, but they're going full speed ahead, creating these coal projects in other countries. Supposedly it's slowed down in recent years, but I think that's more of a reflection of just the overall economic climate than it is a change in heart of the environmental policy of China. And of course, I mentioned port facilities. This Hambantota harbor in Sri Lanka had to be taken over by the Chinese because Sri Lanka had to declare bankruptcy and couldn't repay their massive loan on this project. And China is also heavily involved with the largest port in Sri Lanka, which is the port city of Colombo, not this guy. So the Colombo Port City project is a $1.4 billion project that includes luxury oceanside development, a resort, casino, conference center, marina, apartments, business district, and green space. So all Chinese corporations involved with this. And I was surprised to learn that some of these Belt and Road projects are actually in the Arab Gulf. So no doubt China attempting to secure more of their energy sources. But we'll just see how well this will play out over time. It's been a pretty rough go for China's construction companies and their banks, as well as these companies on the receiving end of this Chinese aid, as they would call it. So let me know what you think in the comments section. I want to send a shout out to the channel members. I really appreciate your ongoing support, as well as those of you who have provided super thanks. That's another great way to support the channel. I've got a variety of project videos coming up, a few updates. I also have geology related videos that are in production right now that'll post here in December. So please stay tuned for future videos.